Good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. And my name is Joe. I'm the lead pastor here. And for all of you who are guests today, if I've not met you, I'd love to meet you. I'll be out in the commons after the service. Come by, say hello, introduce yourself. Maybe you've got some parents with you today for Mary Harmon Baylor Family Weekend. Bring them by, drag them by, okay? And introduce them to me. And so I'd love to meet them. Also want to welcome those who are watching by live stream. Thank you for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for joining us online. We'd love for you to do that in person sometime. So we've been talking about how everybody counts. And I'm kind of wondering how you're doing with this. I wonder how that's fitting for you. I wonder how that's feeling. This idea of everybody, that you count in the eyes of God, that you matter. I'm wondering about that because here's the thing. We have looked at in our scriptures all of the major types of scriptures just about. We've been in Genesis, one of the historical books. We've been in Psalms, one of the major poetry books. We've been in the Gospels, where we talked about Jesus saying that you count and that you matter. And then last week we saw the Apostle Paul in one of his letters to the churches, talked about how you matter. And today we're going to be looking at the Apostle Peter. We're covering all these different books of the Bible, from Genesis all the way through the New Testament. We're looking at the different types of books. They were written over a span of about 12 to 1,300 years, more or less, something like that. And they're all saying the same main thing, that you count, that you matter. And I'm wondering how that's fitting for you. I'm wondering how that's feeling for you. I'm wondering how you're doing with that. And it's especially key to think about that today because when we look at the message Peter has for us today in his letter to the churches of a particular area, there's a little bit of a concern I've got for you. Quite frankly, I'm going to be honest with you about something. I'm concerned that if you don't really have a really good angle on this idea that you really matter to God, that you count to God, that everybody counts and you count, then when we read what Peter has to say, it might be a little bit of a challenge. I think it might actually be something like a steeplechase race. You ever seen these races? They started in Ireland where they ran between the villages and got from one church of steeple to the next village and steeple of a church to the next and all of that. Now it's a 3,000-meter race with 28 3-foot barriers and 7 12-foot-long water jumps to get over. And I wouldn't even make it past the first one, okay? I would need help. I would have to wear a life vest while I'm doing that race. But anyway, what I'm concerned about is that if you have a challenge today about how you think you matter to God, when you hear what Peter has to say, it might end up being like that last 3-foot barrier and 12-foot water challenge of a steeplechase for you, and you may go, I'm done. I'm out. I can't handle it. Especially if there's something going on in your life right now that makes you think, well, I don't think really God cares. I don't think really I matter to him. Or I think maybe he's forgotten me. And what really comes into play is whatever you have in your mind as your image or your picture or your drawing of God. We all have this kind of image of God, that when God comes up in a conversation or we think about God, we have this image in our mind. And a pastor named A.W. Tozer said this about that image of God, that what comes to our mind when we think about God is actually the most important thing about us. I don't know what kind of image you have in your mind when you think about God. I can describe what mine's like, but I got to tell you, wherever we grew up, the family we grew up in, the church background we've had, some sort of experience, maybe life experiences that we've had, all kind of help us draw this idea or this image or this picture of God in our minds. And quite frankly, sometimes those are really negative and really dark. And when we read this story that Peter has to tell to the churches, it could be a problem. Some of you know that over the last 3 years, I've been studying just kind of some, kind of continued lifelong learning that I do. I've been studying with a group called Renovare Institute, and the director of that, Carolyn Ahrens, she lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, says this about these images of God that we have in our minds. First of all, there's the professed image. That's the image of God that we say we believe about God. When someone asks us, what do you think about God? We give them scripture, verse, we give them what we believe about God. And then she talks about how there's the default images of God. And those are the real images that we have, that if we're honest about them, they're there. And they really show up when life happens, when we have some sort of negative or stress or difficult thing go on in our life. We fall back to those default images of how we think about God. And so when we read this thing that Peter has to say in his epistle, his letter to the churches, I'm thinking what might happen is some of that default image of God might come up. Now, another teacher in that institute that I've been involved with the last 3 years, a guy named Trevor Hudson, he's from South Africa, and I love what he has to say about this stuff. And I wish I could say these things in his South African accent. You would get so much more out of it if I could. But I know if I tried, I would get my South Texas drawl in with his South African accent, and it would not work, okay? So I'm just going to give you the information, okay? And if you want to try to hear it in his South African accent, that's awesome. But this is what he says about God. First of all, God is bigger than we can imagine. I was sitting with Trevor about a year ago at lunch one day, and he leaned across the table and he goes, Joe, God is very, 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 very big. And I thought, that's so simple, and yet we have such a hard time wrapping our minds around that. God is bigger than we can imagine. He's greater and better than we can hope. God is closer than we realize. He's right here, right now. For those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, he actually is living inside of us by way of his Holy Spirit. And God is more relatable than we can comprehend. God is into this relationship with you. God is more relatable than we can comprehend. I wonder how that fits for you in the image you have of God. The wonderful thing about the image you and I have in our minds about God is that it's redrawable. And maybe today, some of that image will be redrawn for you. And it'd be a better image, a more positive image. Because if it's a negative image or a dark image, when we talk about the things we're going to talk about today, it'll be like that steeplechase. One more barrier that you're not able to get over, or one more patch of water that you cannot traverse, and you'll give up. And I just pray and hope that you won't do that, that by the end of the day, you really will believe that you matter to God, that you count. Let's look in the text in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. We'll get there in a second. I'll give you a little bit of background while you find it. So open up a copy of God's Word, 2 Peter chapter 3, or open up the church app. Open up Bible Gateway. I'm going to be reading from the Message translation today. Entire Bible translated by a guy named Eugene Peterson. An incredible work. And this particular work that he did in the letter that Peter wrote to the churches of a particular area is really vibrant, and I wanted to share it with you today. Now, by the way, this particular letter is important because he wrote this letter to a bunch of churches that were going through a very, very difficult time. They were under a very, very heavy, strict atmosphere of persecution. You and I don't really know what persecution is like. It's like Valerie and I have friends right now that live in particular parts of the world. They are there as missionaries to try to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Not only is it illegal for them to be doing that where they are, it's actually even illegal for them to even meet with other believers in public. It is that illegal to do that. In fact, if they were to try to do that, they probably would be deported. The people they were meeting with that lived there all the time would probably be arrested, and nobody would be able to see the light of day again. It is that still happening in our world today. That was going on here in this day. It was very, very problematic. People were being accused of all kinds of things. They were being shunned in their businesses. They were being disowned by their families. The Roman government had even begun to pick up on it. They were being arrested, some of them, before it was over with, including Peter, who wrote this letter, would actually be executed for their faith. I mean, it was very, very serious stuff. And what they kept hoping for was the promised return of Jesus. They had heard that Jesus was going to come back, set everything straight, and they heard that it could happen any day now. And they were beginning to lose heart and lose faith that that was really the case. And so Peter was writing them the letter to say, hey, no, it's still going to happen. And guys, they thought it could have happened any day now. And here we are in a modern venue at First Baptist Church Temple, Texas, on a Sunday in September in 2023, and we're still waiting for the return of Christ. And maybe there's some of you in the room today that think, yeah, I believe in Jesus, just not that part of it, and I don't think he's ever going to be coming back. I want to tell you that we have a message today to hear from Peter. Let's look there. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. He says, don't overlook the obvious here, friends. With God, one day is as good as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. God isn't late with his promises, some measure lateness. He is restraining himself on account of you, holding back the end because he doesn't want anyone lost. Some of the translations say God doesn't want even one person to be left out or perish. He's giving everyone space and time to change. So as we think about how we are important to God, I thought it would be important today if we worked a little bit on the drawing that you and I have in our minds about God. Because if we don't come with a very healthy or accurate or positive image of God in our minds, this kind of idea that Peter talks about here of persecution and us having to continue to wait for the return of Christ to set everything straight is going to be very problematic. It's going to be a big challenge for us. And so I want to share some things I think I see what Peter is saying about God that might help you with your image of God, your picture of God, your drawing of God. First of all, God's timing is not our timing. He says that in the very first phrase. Don't overlook the obvious here, friends. With God, one day is as good as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. In other words, God is not limited by time. He's not controlled by time. You and I are controlled by time. I had somebody the other day ask me, Pastor, why do you wear 2 watches? Well, this isn't even a watch, okay? It's something else, all right? It keeps up with all kinds of stuff. You don't none of you, okay? It's none of your business, okay? But this is a watch, okay? It's my $9 Walmart watch right there, okay? All right? But we are controlled by time. Everywhere we go, time is important. You and I, if we were raised right, know that to be on time, you got to be early somewhere, because if you arrive on time, what? You're late. That's right, okay? You got it, okay? We know that. God isn't controlled by that. He's not limited by time. He created time. He is in eternity, and time is only for a time. There is a time right now where time is, but there will be a time when time isn't. And that's where God is. He's above that. He is beyond that. One of my favorite preachers of all time, an African-American pastor, E.V. Hill, who pastored in Los Angeles, California, used to say it this way: God is always on time. God is never early. Can I get an amen about that? And then he said, and God is never late. And beloved, sometimes God cuts her mighty close. But God is always right on time. You and I have to trust that. His timing is not our timing. Another thing about God I want you to see here is that God is patient and long-suffering and hopeful in waiting. He is restraining himself on account of you, holding back the end because he doesn't want anyone lost. What Peter is saying is, one of the reasons maybe that God hasn't sent Jesus back yet is because he's given you more time to get your stuff together. God is patient. He's long-suffering. He's hopeful. He's giving everyone space and time. God gives time and space for sinners to get to a point of belief and decide they will follow. I have to tell you, I think that is one of the areas I have to work the most about my little drawing or my image of God, is that he gives time and space. If you're a parent, you know the idea of giving people time and space. to get their room picked up, or to decide they are going to get their homework done, or decide that they are going to finally, they're going to get out and get a job, and whatever, fill in the blank. You give them that time and that space, and human nature is that whatever space and time you give them, how much of it are they going to use? All of it. That's right. All of it. Parents used to ask me before they sent their kid off to camps with me during the summer, how much money should I send with them, Pastor Joe? I said, well, it's pretty simple. Okay. I said, how much do you want them to spend? Because whatever you send, that's exactly how much they're going to spend. So that's the way human nature is. God is giving time and space. And the fourth thing I want you to see is that God's desire is for not even one person to be left out. Let me read the text again. He is restraining himself on account of you, holding back the end because he doesn't want anyone lost. Not even one. This is real similar language. Keep your place in 2 Peter. And look with me in John chapter 3. Real similar language. Or if you're on the church app, just scroll down and you'll find this. All right, John chapter 3. Now, when I say John 3:16, and I'm going to say it in a minute, your mind is going to go to that verse the way you learned it perhaps in church as a child like me. I can say it, will always be able to say it. I guess it's the very first verse I ever memorized. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. Has some of that same language that Peter talks about here. But I want to read it from the Message because it says it in just a little different way. And I always think it's healthy when we hear something that's the same truth, but said in a little bit different, maybe word order or a little bit different emphasis, and it kind of brings a freshness to it for us. So John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. This is how much God loved the world. He gave his Son, his one and only Son, and this is why. So that no one need be destroyed, not one. So that no one need be destroyed, not one. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. God didn't go to all the trouble of sending his Son merely to point an accusing finger, telling the world how bad it was. No, he came to help, to put the world right again. Anyone who trusts in him is acquitted, forgiven. Anyone who refuses to trust, though, has long since been under the death sentence without knowing it. And why? Because of that person's failure to believe in the one-of-a-kind Son of God when introduced to him. What this verse tells us is that God has done all that he can do to give us a way out of our separation from him. You see, if you have this really negative image of God, that he's the kind of God that just likes to bump off people at the last minute and send them to hell right before they got to heaven, or if he's a God that, is some kind of like evil, dark person that just punishes people and can't wait to send them to hell. Or maybe if you have an image of God that he is like, forgetful and apathetic and just really doesn't care. Like, I said I'd send Jesus back, but I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Or if you have this image of God in your mind that he somehow is actually not powerful enough to be able to actually keep the promises he has given. Then when you read these texts in 2 Peter and John 3, there's probably some big ifs and check marks in your mind. And I want to assure you today that our God cares. He has not forgotten. He is all-powerful, will keep his promises, and he has made a way, every way possible, to keep people from actually having to perish and go to hell. And he has given time and space for you still in this day and time to respond to his invitation. And I have a question for you. Do you realize God is waiting on you? Now, I don't like having to wait on people. I don't like doing that, man. When I'm with my family and we're trying to get somewhere on time, I'm always the first one in the car, got it going, backed in, ready to pull out with everybody going on. Can I get an amen? All right, yeah, that's what I love. And for me to be late somewhere, man, when they start, I mean, the only way we've ever made it going to church all these years is that we've gone in separate vehicles. That's how we figured out how to do it, all right? And, Valerie and I are just the two of us. Now we have an empty nest. We still go in separate vehicles, okay? So it's just the way it goes, all right? I mean, I don't like, but there's something I like even less than waiting on other people. And what is it? I hate it when I find out somebody's been waiting on me. And I have to ask you this question. I realize it's kind of harsh, but I want to ask it. Do you realize God is waiting on you? The ball is in your court. Jesus' primary, almost singular message in the Gospels is simple. Repent and believe, for the kingdom of God is at hand. That's what Jesus would say over and over and over again. Repent and believe, for the kingdom of God is at hand. What he meant was the kingdom of God is available now. He has made the kingdom of God available. He, having been the Son, the King of the kingdom, all even before the beginning of time and all of eternity, did come to the earth in the form of a baby, God in the flesh, to live and die on the cross and be raised from the grave in order to make a way, a portal, a path for you and me to be able to enter the kingdom of God. That's how valuable you are to him. And he would say that he doesn't want one person to perish. Not even one. He's made a way. Do you realize God is waiting on you? Now, maybe you need more time and space. I don't know. But you do realize there is going to be an end to the time and space at some time. And gosh, listen, come on. I do not want this to turn into some sort of like turn or burn kind of message. I grew up with that all my life. I want to kick bricks when it comes to stuff like that. I got to be careful doing that now that I'm older. Okay, but anyway, I can't stand like turn to God or you're going to burn in hell. No. Or this one. I heard this one when I was in high school in the little church I grew up in, bless its heart, and its pastor meant well, but oh my goodness, literally one Sunday I heard this one. If you were to die on your way home from church today in a car wreck, where would you spend all of eternity? Okay, I get it. I just don't want this message to come across that way. I really don't. But I will tell you that God has given us time and space, but that time and space will come to an end. Do you realize God's waiting on you? What Peter said to those in the room at that time when he wrote this letter was, actually, he said it, God is waiting on you. He is restraining himself on account of you, holding back the end because he doesn't want anyone lost. Do you realize that's how important you are to God? If you're watching online today, you realize that's how important you are to God. That's how much you matter to him. He is waiting. He's inviting you to trust him, to place your confidence in him as your Savior. Will you take him up on the offer today? And maybe you've done that. Maybe you are a believer, but maybe you've kind of sort of drifted a little bit, or you're kind of wondering about this God that has let this thing happen in your life that you would not have planned if you had been in charge. You don't really like it. Or maybe you're wondering whether it's really true or not, that he's going to come back and set everything straight. You're already a believer. There's an invitation for you as well. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 20, Jesus is speaking to those who already believe, but they become lukewarm in their faith. And he says this to them, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Most of the time, that's applied to those who don't believe, letting God into their heart. It's actually something Jesus says to those who already believe. This is what he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and anyone who opens the door, I will come into him, and I will dine with him, and him with me." That dining thing is about relationship. That's the kind of depth of relationship and interaction God wants to have with you because you are that important to him. You matter that much. Do you realize God is waiting on you? Would you bow? Would you pray? Heads bowed, eyes closed. Today, maybe in your prayer to God, you would say yes to his invitation to you, and you would put your belief, your confidence in him to be your Savior, and you would tell him that. You've taken time, you've taken the space he's given, but today you say, God, I don't need time and space anymore. I'm ready to step into this relationship with you. Maybe you're here today and there are steeplechase-like hurdles in your path and water challenges that you cannot get past. And the image you have in your mind of God is a big, big, big problem. What if you asked God today to help you redraw the image you have of him? I'm wondering today if you would realize you're so valuable to him that you would say, rather than asking for more time and more space, you ask God to give you faith to say yes to his invitation. Lord, in the name of Christ, hear our prayers. Amen.